everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Miraculous Thinking. I'm your host, Elenique Marie, and with me, the one that needs no introduction, Crystal Ann Compton. How are you, my friend?
I'm sick, but I mean, I'm here.
Okay. Well, I share your plight. I'm having a spazzy back, so, we'll just crawl our way through an entertaining hour into a beautiful little book where we
Yes.
can understand that everything we're feeling is just an illusion,
Yes.
right?
This pain isn't real.
The pain is not real. So today we're going to be discussing the first 6 chapters of Illusions. And next week we'll be discussing the final 6 chapters. And so I really urge you, if you haven't already, to get this little book. You're perfectly in time to catch up. It's quite small. It's not big at all. And it's really a little story. It's really a kind of a parable and a story, very easy to read. So I would love it if you would pick it up. And if you do, please share with us what were your takeaways? What stood out for you? Because you only enrich the conversation that we have. And to that end, Crystal, how can they get in contact with us?
All you have to do is write us at miraculousthinking@gmail.com. That's miraculousthinking@gmail.com. But you can also join our Facebook group, which just search for Miraculous Thinking or go to the link in the description. You can also leave a comment on our YouTube videos because everything we do in audio, we also have a video version. So you can drop a comment there. We read everything. Probably the easiest way, though, is to send us an email because we'll get that, we'll read it, and then we will address it.
Exactly. So if there's nothing else.
Well, I thought before we go into it, why don't we tell people what we're doing over the next couple of months? Because I think last time we gave the wrong book that's coming up after this one. So why don't you clear us up with what we're going to be reading in May and then what we're going to be getting into after that?
Okay. So we decided in May we're going to read Inside the Body of God by Karen Curry Parker. And we're excited to explore this book.
This looks like a good one.
It really goes into the quantum-ness of us all and that intelligence that lives within us. And how do we really start to awaken and be present to that intelligence? And not just as a thought, but as an actual experience. So psyched about that. And following that, we're going to be doing the way of Integrity, right? By Martha Beck. Another really fabulous book, another wonderful female writer. And in it, we're going to really explore what does that mean to be in integrity, and what does integrity mean? Because we tend to think that it's about correct action, right? Being in integrity, but integrity means to be whole or to be in wholeness. And so to be in wholeness, what does that really look like? And how can you really step into that so that your life is a reflection of that? So that'll be the next book after that. And I think that's it for us, right? As far as what we have planned.
Right. We're going to be talking about the books that we'll be covering after that. But this is another kind of space where we would love to hear from you. If you think you've got a book that'll rock our world, that's spiritual or heart-centered, metaphysical, we would love to hear about it. So you can write us again, miraculousthinking@gmail.com. Give us your book recommendations and we will definitely check it out. And if it piques our interest, we will cover it.
We will.
We will. Yes, absolutely.
And we look forward to it. That's how we discover the best books, right? Yes. Through suggestions from others, including the one that we're going to explore today. So shout out to Crystal's brother. Yes. What's your brother's name again?
My brother's name is Jesse.
Jesse, thank you.
Jesse, thank you, thank you. And he recommended this book to me in the 90s. And I purchased the book and I put it away. And I'm really not sure if this is the same book because I repurchase books all the time. I'm just a ding-dong. I like give them away or whatever, or I thrift them. And then I find myself wanting to read it and then I order them again. But yeah, he recommended this in the 90s and I told him I would read it. And so I am fulfilling my promise. It is 2023, but we're finally getting to it.
It's happening.
It is. I let him know that we're covering it. And interestingly, I had a guest on my other podcast, which is Life Magnetics. And we were just having kind of a cosmic convo about whatever. And he just threw in, and one of the most classic books is Illusions by Richard Bach. And I had it right here. I'm like, you mean this book?
That's awesome.
Yes, I actually did like an hour-long video for each chapter of this book like 4 or 5 years ago. So it was just serendipitous that I met somebody whose life was changed.
What was his name again?
His name is Louis D'Souza, but he's on a podcast called LOA Today, or Law of Attraction Today.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Interesting. I'm gonna have to check
Yeah.
that one out.
Yeah, a little
I like
bit of
that.
serendipity there. So, my first thought about this before we jump into what we
Mhm.
cover, what we read, was that it was kind of refreshing to have a fictional book, because
Agreed.
all I ever read is nonfiction,
Mhm.
reference, spiritual reference, metaphysical reference. And I think for the surrender experiment, when we covered that a couple of months ago, although it wasn't fiction, it kind of read like a story.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
did appreciate receiving a story and then gleaning the spiritual stuff throughout it. And that's kind of what Illusions is. Illusions has less detail than the surrender experiment. It is a story. The main character's name is Richard, same as the author. I really kind of want to look up what brought this book about. And, did he have a vision? Through meditation, did he get some words? Like, it's such a profound little piece of writing, but I really did like the way that it was delivered with the fictional story of Richard and Don Shimoda. I'm getting ahead of myself though. What are some of your takeaways, just generally speaking, from the first half of this book?
Well, in reference to your question, that question that you just had about how did that come to him, did you see that he put a little pre-section before we start part one, where he actually right before the first page of Illusions, where he actually kind of answers that?
No, of course I didn't. I just went right to chapter one.
They're like,
What did he
yes.
say?
He's like, he said one of the questions that he got the most after he wrote Jonathan Siegel was, what do you write next, Richard? After Jonathan, what? And he said that he didn't have to write anything next, right? That's what he answered. He said, I don't have to write anything, next. I'm not starved for a career. He said, but every summer he took his antique biplane out into the green meadow seas of the Midwest America and flew passengers for $3 rides and began to feel an old tension again. There was something left to say, and I hadn't said it. And then he goes, I do not enjoy writing at all. If I can turn my back on an idea out there in the dark, if I can avoid opening the door to it, I won't even reach for a pencil. So it's, again, reluctant, like a reluctant writer, much as the
Mhm.
character, sort of a reluctant messiah, right? He goes, but once in a while, there's a great dynamite burst of flying glass and brick and splinters through the front wall, and somebody stalks over the rubble, seizes me by the throat, and gently says, I will not let you go until you set me in words on paper. That's how I met Illusions. There in the Midwest, even I'd lie on my back practicing cloud vaporizing,
Mhm.
and I couldn't get the story out of my mind. What if somebody came along who was really good at this, who could teach me how my world works and how to control it? What if I could meet a super advanced? What if a Siddhartha or a Jesus came into our time with power over the illusions of the world because he knew the reality behind them? And what if I could meet him in person if he were flying a biplane and landed in the same meadow with me? What would he say? What would he be like? And then he said maybe he wouldn't be like the Messiah on the oil streaked, grass stained pages of my journal. Maybe he wouldn't say anything this book says. But then again, this the things this one told me that we magnetize into our lives whatever we hold in our thought. For instance, if that is true, then somehow I have brought myself to this moment for a reason, and so have you. Perhaps it's no coincidence that you're holding this book. Perhaps there's something about these adventures that you came here to remember. I choose to think so, and I choose to think my Messiah is perched out there on some other dimension, not fiction at all, watching us both and laughing for the fun of it, happening just the way we've planned it to be.
That's great.
So you manifested your answer quicker
I
than you
did. And I recall skimming over that. I need to have better reading comprehension. And it's interesting to me that the way he's describing that for me sounds like channeling, like somebody grabs
Yes.
him by the throat and, like, with a sense of urgency, you've got to speak this out, or you've got to create this thing. Like, it's trying to move through you, which I think is very, very interesting. And it's remarkable that he's creating the story of a reluctant Messiah and pulling through. And as we get into the book, we'll see pulling through parables and truisms and ideas and concepts that can only be coming from him. And this reluctant
Yes.
Messiah is within him.
And
Right.
within us, right?
And within
And that
us, yes.
and even as you approach the book already, sometimes when you pick up a book, there's a reluctance. Like you've had a reluctance even to read it, and you've had it in your
Uh-huh.
possession for 20 years, right? So there's this part of us that resists something. And then there's a moment at which that part just says, now. And
Mhm.
now is the time that you're ready to hear it. And I love that when he says at the end there, and it was just as we planned it to be. And
Mhm.
and that gives me a lot of peace lately because the bulk of my life I've been under this idea that I had to figure out my life purpose. What is this purpose? I need to figure it out, and I'm going to run out of time. And you know, and there's a moment when like recently realized there's all the time in the world. Actually, there is nothing. I need everything I'm doing. I'm collecting the raw materials for that one moment or series of moments or infinite moments. Maybe they're going to continue to happen, and you hit a new plateau and you find a new aspect of yourself to evolve into or a purpose. But it gives me so much peace to know that even all the mistakes and all the missteps and all the detours are part of the road that leads you to the moment that you've always planned,
Mhm.
that your soul's been holding for you.
Right. And which involved a path that you were always on, even though you
Yes,
felt
that you
like
were never off.
felt like you were lost, like you were stuck in a ditch, but actually
Hmm.
you've been on the path you were always supposed to be on, going to the destination you were always meant to arrive at.
That's it.
This idea of divine order. I like
Yes.
this simple little story. It's about a chance meeting, but is there anything left to chance? Well, we would say no. It's about a chance meeting between a gentleman named Richard and a gentleman named Don Shimoda. Um, but it's after the story of, I guess, a Messiah emerges somewhere in the Midwest, and how this Messiah, after creating miracles, kind of runs away from the job title of Messiah, like he doesn't want any
Hmm.
part of it, and happens to meet Richard in this field on this one day, and they begin their journey together. But why don't you start us off with chapter one? What were some of your thoughts and some of the things you wanted to talk about with that chapter?
Well, the entire thing, Crystal.
Okay. I'm like,
So
should we read the whole chapter?
yeah,
Because
I
it's
feel
really
like we
great.
can because it's short,
Mhm.
and we can discuss each one. I think that would be beneficial. Um, it's written in 33. So chapter one is different from the rest of the book because it looks like a little notebook, like a
Right.
little handwritten notebook. Oh, you have a
Mhm.
better one.
Mhm.
And each paragraph has a number. And the numbers equal 33, which I thought was kind of probably hearkening back to Jesus,
Mhm.
coming into his ministry at the age of 33 and passing away at 33, right? So, um, did he come into the ministry at 33? No,
30.
31, 30, and then
30,
he
and he had it for 3 years, and then he
3
passed at
years. That's
33.
right.
Mhm.
There you go. That's why I keep my Jesus, my Jesus expert on call. So yeah. So let's read it. You want to take turns? I'll reach it
No,
first.
I'm
No?
losing
Oh,
my
you're
voice, so
okay.
I'm gonna leave
Okay.
it to you.
Okay. There was a master come unto the earth, born in the holy land of Indiana, raised in the mystical hills of East Fort Wayne. What do you make of that?
Well, I've been to Indiana, honey. There's nothing mystical about it, but I think that there's so much mystical about it. Any place on earth, in this life, it is magical. So I just thought that that was paradoxical. I liked it.
And for me, what it starts off is with this idea that we're already seeding the idea that a master can come from anywhere.
Mhm.
Doesn't have to come from some mystical place, in the middle of Egypt or whatever. Much like Jesus came from a very unremarkable place called Bethlehem, which was just a small little town. So, but we
Mhm.
tend to think like people have to come from these big places. So if that Messiah can come out of Indiana, we can come out of wherever we come from and still be messiahs in, little m
Yes.
messiahs.
Yes.
Okay, number two, the master learned of this world in the public schools of Indiana, and as he grew in his trade as a mechanic of automobiles. Again, further,
Mundane.
very
Mhm.
mundane, very
Mhm.
mundane. Three, but the master had learnings from other lands and other schools, from other lives that he had lived. He remembered these, and remembering, became wise and strong, so that others saw his strength and came to him for counsel.
So this is a a man who has had other lives, but unlike so many of us, is conscious to those other lives, and he is aware of and active in the lessons of those other lives in this life as the Messiah.
And I heard someone, because I always like to hear what people have to say about these things. So I was listening to a gentleman. I'm sorry that I'm forgetting his name. He made the point that he wasn't even sure if he was referring to past lives
Mm.
because he says he doesn't use the word past.
Hmm.
He says that in our whole life is a series of lives, who we were between 5 and 10 years old, and that life that we lived, and the person
Mm.
that we were, and then who we were in high school, and that whole lifetime of high school, and then the lifetime of college and first marriage, or whatever. And so he said that we don't even have to go the route of taking to a past life, just that this man had learned enough from the lives that he had even led, whether they be past or present, to have gained wisdom. And I thought that was really cool how
That
he
is
put
very
that,
cool. And that is so true. Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Okay, number 4. The master believed that he had the power to help himself and all mankind. And as he believed, so it was for him, so that others saw his power and came to him to be healed of their troubles and their many diseases.
Hmm.
I mean, we talked about this so much. As you believe, so it is, right? So again, here we are having a lot of this Jesus. I mean, you can already start to feel the Jesus undercurrent here of belief. So really laying the foundation for that. And then number 5 is quite long. The master believed that it is well for any man to think upon himself as a son of God. And as he believed, so it was. And the shops and garages where he worked became crowded and jammed with those who sought his learning and his touch, and the streets outside with those who longed only that the shadow of his passing might fall upon them and change their lives. And
Hmm.
again, reminds me so much of Jesus
Oh,
and
very
all the
much
story,
so.
right?
And of course, Jesus's vocation was that of a carpenter. So,
Mm-hmm.
very kind of blue collary, working with things, making them work. But I love how he begins that particular parable, parable number 5, or part number 5, where he says that the master believed that we were all sons of God. It wasn't just him, it was all of us, which is such a powerful statement. What does that
Mm-hmm.
mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then goes on to say, and nonetheless, people still came to him for the miracles, still came for him, came to him for the teaching, came to him for the dispensation of the energy that they already were. So setting up kind of
Exactly.
a little bit of a conflict, which Jesus
And that
also felt as well.
absolutely. And the fact that they had in their power to believe in him made him able to do these things, but
Hmm.
they wouldn't take that same power that they had, that they were giving away and projecting onto him. They wouldn't turn it on themselves, but they would happily give it away to him. And how many of us don't do that all the time?
Yeah.
There's some magical property in that other person. The other person has something I don't have. Yet he believed that it was within you, just like Jesus. And Jesus got tired of saying that, girl.
Hmm.
He got tired of
Hmm.
saying that. So 6, it came to pass because of the crowds that the several foremen and shop managers bid the master leave his tools and go his way, for so tightly was he thronged that neither he nor other mechanics had room to work upon the automobiles. So now it's starting to crowd his style, right?
Hmm.
The pressure of popularity,
Hmm.
right? 7, so it was that he went into the countryside, and people following began to call him Messiah and worker of miracles. And as they believed, it was so. So again, here this thing that who is creating the miracle?
Hmm.
The belief. Whose belief? The person's belief that the other person is actually healing them, right?
Hmm.
So 8, if a storm passed as he spoke, not a raindrop touched a listener's head. The last of the multitude heard his words as clearly as the first, no matter lightning nor thunder in the sky about. And always he spoke to them in parables, much like this book,
Hmm.
right, is a parable. 9, and he said unto them, within each of us lies the power of our consent to health and to sickness, to riches and to poverty, to freedom and to slavery. It is we who control these and not another.
Talk about
This,
that word consent.
yes,
What do you think that speaks to?
personal power, for one, that you're allowing something or not allowing it, right? And the gentleman, the same one that I mentioned earlier that had that good point that he brought up, he said, when you eat like a big serving, when you overeat in your meals, every single meal, you're consenting to gain weight. When you spend your money without thinking, or you don't save any money and you're just living your life, you're consenting to poverty. Now, he said that he doesn't mean that to be true for instances where someone attacks you or hurts you or, is abusive. But there are many, many things in our lives that we say we're victim to them, but we are choosing them. Every single day we are giving a yes to, we're consenting to the current status, consenting to fear, consenting to hopelessness, because there is a power within each of us that can choose something else. And people have proven it all the time, right? The one that finally gets sick and tired of feeling sick and tired and just says, this is it. And where did that come from? Choice. So I don't know, what does that mean to you?
I like what you've just said, and I think that's a part of it for sure. I think that the word consent, or to permit something, speaks to the fact that it is always available. It's just up to you to consent or to say yes. And you can say yes to everything that is available, good, bad, or indifferent. So it's not necessarily something that you have to create from raw materials. No, the universe has it available for you at all times. It is about what you consent to and allow into the experience, which I thought was an interesting word to use.
I do. Yes. Yes. And again, empowering people, because
Yes.
all these have been building up to one idea, and the idea being you are powerful. You are a son of God, and you can consent to situations, or you can withdraw your consent and thereby change the situation. Right.
Yes.
And so empowering the individual on the journey rather than creating all these external sources of power external to yourself.
And isn't it kind of a great way to look at manifestation and creation when it is already there and created? It's not really you like, okay, now I've got to feel this and I got to think this, and now my subconscious getting it, and I got to wait a week in order for it to materialize. No, it is already in your experience. It is already in your field. It is really just about aligning yourself vibrationally or in your belief system to the thing that you want to attract, which has already been created on your behalf because you already planned for it in the first place.
Exactly. Number 10, a millman spoke and said, easy words for you, master, for you are guided as we are not, and need not toil as we toil. A man has to work for his living in this world. And
disempowered. You have all the gifts. You're so spiritual. Why? But we're not. And
exactly.
So it is.
And so it is. Exactly. 11, the master answered and said, once there lived a village of creatures along the bottom of a great crystal river. Number 12, the current of the river swept silently over them, all, young and old, rich and poor, good and evil, the current going its own way, knowing only its own crystal self. 13, each creature, in its own manner, clung tightly to the twigs and rocks of the river bottom, for clinging was their way of life, and resisting the current, what each had learned from birth. Number 14. But one creature said at last, I am tired of clinging. Though I cannot see it with my eyes, I trust the current knows where it is going. I shall let go and let it take me where it will. Clinging, I shall die of boredom. 15. The other creatures laughed and said, fool, let go. And that current you worship will throw you tumbled and smashed across the rocks, and you will die quicker than boredom. 16. But the one heeded them not, and taking a breath, did let go, and at once was tumbled and smashed by the current across the rocks. 17. Yet in time, as the creature refused to cling again, the current lifted him free from the bottom, and he was bruised and hurt no more. 18. And the creatures downstream, to whom he was a stranger, cried, see, a miracle, a creature like ourselves, yet he flies. See the Messiah come to save us all. 19. And the one carried in the current, said, I am no more Messiah than you. The river delights to lift us free if only we dare let go. Our true work is this voyage, this adventure. 20. But they cried the more, Savior, all the while clinging to the rocks. And when they looked again, he was gone, and they were left alone, making legends of a Savior. What do you
Hmm.
think of all that?
So much that we all exist in this crystal river of divine energy, divine God, divine love. Clinging is another word for attachment, that which we are attached to. And I think one of the main things we are attached to is our perception of ourselves, who we are, what limits us, what does not limit us, our value, our currency. And these beliefs of self keep us stuck, clinging to the rocks at the bottom of the river. Whereas if we trusted that innate flow of the river that we are a part of, but that is also within us, we would be taken exactly where we're supposed to go, probably in a much more speedy way as well, as opposed to efforting, clinging and moving rock to rock. It's going to take me forever to just get, down the river that way. But if I let go and I trust the flow of the river, I will get there so much faster and I will go exactly where I'm supposed to go. So there's a lot there. That's how manifestation works. With manifestation, there's this idea is you have the concept of what you would like to manifest. You do all the things that you're supposed to do in order to do this, the feeling of I am already that. And then you are to let go. You are really not to return to that which you seek to manifest in order to second guess yourself or amend your order. You're supposed to let go and let the universe move you and deliver it at the right time. But too many of us continue to cling and have our attachments, calling our blessings and manifestations back to the present moment. So we have to reorder them, keeping us stuck. What did you think? I could go on and on. There's so much there.
I just thought it was such a beautiful way of describing what we all struggle with, right? And I love when the little sea creature, is like, I am tired of clinging. And I just so relate to that statement. Every day I'm just like, how can I let go more? Like, how can I let go more? Because it's exhausting to try to run the show of life, to be trying to protect yourself, put your arms up against it, or have a plan, or have the whole plan laid out. It's exhausting. And like you said, probably takes a lot longer to get to that place where you wish to be. And I love that he said, clinging, I shall die of boredom. And isn't that what most of us are struggling with? Like when you hear people being depressed, having depression and anxiety, whatever, I think underneath it all is just this deep sense of boredom, of like emptiness, of just doing this thing. And you don't even know why you're doing it anymore. It's just fear and habit keeping you doing the same things, even though you're not happy. So I love how he described that. And then that when somebody dares to do something different, to actually trust and let go, it looks like madness to everybody else, number one. And number two, when it works, and notice that he said he appeared to people down the stream. So never to your own homeland are you a prophet, right? So
Thank
the
you.
people where you are will never recognize you for what you are, even though you're not even that. You're not the Messiah, but you have figured something out, but they won't recognize it. So it's only the ones further down that see you flying across the sky and attribute magic to you, and all you've done is surrender and let go,
I love
right?
that point. I love that point. That's really good. And another thing I think is interesting is that when he first lets go, he gets tumbled on the rocks. And
Yes.
so it's the matter of faith. He could stop there. He could start clinging again because that didn't work out exactly as he had hoped, but he doesn't. He continues to let go as a principle of faith and thus is taken up in this divine crystal flow.
Yes. Crystal flow.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's important because sometimes when we're trying to do something, create something, be something, have something, it doesn't work out the way we have envisioned it. This is kind of getting back to what we have talked about with surrender. Like, we've got these great ideas for our life, but at the end of the day, thy will be done. I'm going to trust the flow of the river, and having your peace in the faith of that, as opposed to the plans that you have made. Because when we are clinging to the plans that we have made, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And when we are trusting with faith, thy will be done, sometimes we get crucified, sometimes we don't. We don't really know how that's going to work out, but it's about that faith. And the Bible says that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Ooh,
Right.
we could spend a whole hour on
Yeah.
that scripture alone,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it is having the faith to continue to stay letting go. It's not just one
And
time, right? You got to
no.
continue to stay letting
It's
go.
you have to recommit to it because your mind's gonna start to talk you out of it the minute you decide to do it. Like, the minute you decide, all your programming and your old, your the ancient parts of your brain that are there to protect you are gonna say, "No, no, no," and the anxiety and the fear will creep up, and you have to just recommit every time to doing it. And something funny happened. As you know, I was traveling, last week, and I got to the, immigration, and the line was Crystal, I was in line for 2.5 hours.
Girl, when I was in Ireland, I was raging inside. I was not spiritual.
No, right? So I was like, "Okay." At first, I was like, "I'm gonna listen to an Audible book," right? Like, I was like, "I'm just gonna be in the line and pretend like." But then I was like, "But I'm not really then dealing with this," right? Like, I'm dealing with it, but I'm trying to pretend like I'm not. So I was like, "Okay, what if we use this as a practice? What if we use this as a practice? So what would it feel like if I just agreed to not care? Because I'm mad because I have a plan. I want to leave here. I want to go to the restaurant. I want to rent the car, whatever it is. There's all these things that I feel like I need to get to next. But what if I just stood in this line as if there was nowhere else to be? And if it took however long it took, well, then that's okay because there's nowhere else to be. And this is the practice. And I tried it and it was hard. But like 45 minutes into this hot mess, I was bored, but I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't anxious anymore. I wasn't like, don't cut in front of me. Like, what's happening? Like, the whole angry competitiveness went away for a good chunk of time. It came back. And of course, I had to deal with it. And then at a certain point, I was just plain old crazy mad at the end by the 2.5 hour mark. But there was a time when I didn't sit in the soup
Mhm.
of my cortisol and my anger, where I was making myself suffer 50 times more than I needed to, and I was still gonna have to stand in that line. So those moments, I think God sends us, and whatever spirit, our higher self, whatever you want to call it, we send ourselves these things that are masquerading as problems. It's a problem. I'm in this line, but it's actually an invitation. What can you do with this? Can you master this? Can you let go here? Where else can you let go? And then that's the discipline because we can sit on a pillow for 12 hours a day, but that's not going to help you when you're in the immigration line with children crying and there's like 3 agents for 7,000 people. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I love these opportunities. I hate them and I love them
Mhm.
all at the same time.
That's so funny because when we flew into Finland to Helsinki, those Europeans, they got us through
Hmm.
customs or whatever their equivalent is, like, so fast. I was impressed coming from America. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we went into Dublin, which was a kind of a shit show getting through into Dublin, but like getting out of Dublin, I had the same kind of an epiphany. And for the first, I don't know, half of that was probably 2.5 to 3 hours winding our way through like the X-ray machines, the first line, the second line, that I'm a Taurus. I'm just like, I hate to wait. I got my bullhorns out. I'm like, who can I gore? But like in the second line, which was the longest. Oh, and then I didn't have global access. So like people were just passing me by and I'm like, why don't I have global access? Jeremy, why didn't you take care of the global access? Just getting so mad. I like made the decision. I'm going to change my vibration right here. Now this
Hmm.
isn't working for me. I'm going to work myself up into a lather. And what I chose to do instead was kind of a fake it or make it type of a disposition to be cheerful, to start being a comfort to my husband instead of a pain in
Hmm.
his ass, to start saying nice things, to talk to the people in front of me and to the people behind me, and to like crack jokes like, hey, we're in this together. Just the decision alone and outwardly doing it, even though I didn't feel it yet, changed the entire thing. For the rest of that entire line, I was in such a better mood. I should have been doing it the whole time. My husband, he's so funny. The trip from Dallas to Helsinki, which we had a straight shot, so 11 or 12 hours.
Wow.
He didn't book until the very end, so we couldn't get business class. We couldn't get a good seat. We were sat at the very last row in that plane. I was in the middle, of course, because my husband's 6'3". There's another Finnish guy, probably 6'2", and then me in the middle. My husband just like turns off, and I didn't hear a word from him until Helsinki. Inner me is like, how can I get out of this situation? This is so freaking uncomfortable. And in the lines, there's something he can do where he can just detach and just be super chill. He's like, I'm going limp. I'm fine. I'm just numbing out, whatever. And I'm like, oh, I need to figure out how to do that as well. Because the more angry I get, the more I'm clinging to rocks or getting bashed up against a rock and getting mad about it.
Yeah. Well,
I get it.
Yeah, I feel like that in government offices for like driver's licenses and stuff is, I think purgatory is an immigration line where there's one agent and the agent refuses to like move the line along, like
or be nice, or like smile, just be kind,
and then stops and has like breaks. Like right when it was about our turn, the guy literally got out and was like, I'm done, I'm changing shift. And so then the other guy came in with a ginormous backpack, had to get out his like sippy cup and whatever situated. The heck. Yeah. Oh my God.
Help.
Anyway, we digress.
I understand 100% what you're talking about there.
So number 21, and it came to pass when he saw that the multitude thronged him, the more day on day, tighter and closer and fiercer than ever they had. When he saw that they pressed him to heal them without rest and feed them always with his miracles, to learn for them and to live their lives, he went alone that day unto a hilltop apart, and there he prayed. 22, and he said in his heart, infinite radiant is. Isn't that beautiful?
It's so infinite radiant is.
I love that. If it be thy will, let this cup pass from me. Let me lay aside this impossible task. I cannot live the life of one other soul, yet 10,000 cry to me for life. I'm sorry I allowed it all to happen. If it be thy will, let me go back to my engines and my tools, and let me live as other men. 23, and a voice spoke to him on the hilltop, a voice neither male nor female, loud nor soft, a voice infinitely kind. And the voice said unto him, not my will, but thine be done. For what is thy will is mine for thee. Go thy way as other men, and be thou happy on the earth.
Which is amazing, because of course in the Garden of Gethsemane, which we reference over and over again, Jesus says, not my will, God, but thy will be done. And here in this parable, this voice from on high, which is God's voice, the radiant is, saying your will, not my will, because your will, the will you have for yourself, is my will, and I want you to be happy. Go and be happy. Imagine if we all consented to going and being happy.
Yes. I thought this was incredible, and I could really imagine it. And I love how he set it up like that garden scene, you know, but the conversation goes so differently than what we heard. And I love that he took time to say it's neither male nor female, loud nor soft, but just kind, which is that kindness, you know, of that infinite radiant is, that is there. If you can just allow yourself to feel it, you know, which sometimes, I think yesterday I sat outside for a long time. There were so many birds and it was a good breeze. And I was in that moment and I almost went into tears because you could feel life, you know, and it's such a beautiful feeling. So it's just a shame that we hardly ever remember to do it. Yes. I hardly remember to do it. I just, for whatever reason, something said, go outside, sit down. And I actually listened to it this time. You know what I mean? So 24, And hearing, the master was glad and gave thanks and came down from the hilltop humming a little mechanic's song. And when the throng pressed him with its woes, beseeching him to heal for it and learn for it and feed it nonstop from his understanding and to entertain it with his wonders, he smiled upon the multitude and said pleasantly unto them, he quit. I love it.
Me too.
25. For a moment the multitude was stricken dumb with astonishment. 26. And he said unto them, if a man told God that he wanted most of all to help the suffering world, no matter the price to himself, and God answered and told him what he must do, should the man do as he is told? 27. Of course, master, cried the many. It should be pleasure for him to suffer the tortures of hell itself, should God ask for it. 28. No matter what those tortures, nor how difficult the task. 29. Honor to be hanged, glory to be nailed to a tree and burned, if it so be that God has asked, said they. 30. And what would you do? The master said unto the multitude, if God spoke directly to your face and said, I command that you be happy in the world as long as you live, what would you do then? 31. And the multitude was silent. Not a voice, not a sound was heard upon the hillsides, across the valleys where they stood. 32. And the master said unto the silence, in the path of our happiness shall we find the learning for which we have chosen this lifetime. So it is that I have learned this day, and choose to leave you now to walk your own path as you please. 33. And he went his way through the crowds and left them, and he returned to the everyday world of men and machines. Wow.
So that caused me to ask, why is it that we as human beings think that we must suffer for righteousness or suffer to bring glory? Why do we feel like the path, if it's not hard, it's not worth it? Why can't the path of our purpose and our life be happy and joyful and peaceful and fun? Why are we so averse to the idea of that, do you think, Elenique?
I think it's a combination of the way religion has evolved as a kind of an instrument in a way that has, in some ways, sought to control people. And there's nothing that works better for controlling people than guilt and fear. So there is this program running from a very early age within all of us that, if you don't do it this way, because it helps keep things stable. When everybody thinks this is the trajectory and everybody knows what to do and everybody knows their role in the beehive, it keeps a stable beehive. Whether it's functional is a completely different question, but it's stable. So I think that that's part of how society keeps things, and that's why change is so threatening. And that's why messiahs are crucified, because when you come in and you throw in this monkey wrench that says, you don't need the priest. You don't need a job. You don't need to follow any of the rules. Just your communication is direct with God, and you are powerful, like a God, a son of God. People flip out, and they feel threatened, and we'll see that later in this book.
Mm-hmm.
To the degree that people will actually do horrible things to one another if anybody dares threaten the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's why, we are all here trying to decondition ourselves from that belief system. And it is so difficult because it's so layered in, like a very, very complex, so many thin little layers, like an onion. I love that onion thing, because when I think about an onion, there's so many tiny skins. It's not even when you cut it, like if you can peel it and it just keeps coming apart, right? And that's how this is. And when you get to one and you think, oh, I've cleared that, I don't have that anymore. Guess what? The next one shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one. And so you're like, when will I ever be rid of this? And I don't know that there is an answer. I don't even know if it's ever possible to be fully, because while you're in this human body, there is a program to protect the body, which is driven by fear. It prioritizes negatives in order for you to survive and puts the positives in the back. So for me, I think that's a huge part of why we're so blocked on this idea of manifestation and things being easy. It's just not what we were taught.
Mm, right. These agreements that we've made, that we're holding fast to, that we need to relinquish, because did we even make these agreements in the first place, that society should run this way? Weren't we born into these agreements? Is
Yeah.
it incumbent upon us to shift and change those things? Which is why we are all called to be messiahs or way showers or game changers. But it's easier sometimes to just exist in the beehive and then be a drone in the beehive and not really
Yeah.
let go. Let go
And
and
the
go ahead.
gentleman that I was listening to, he made a point. He said, Messiah before, he said words had a moment before they existed. And the word Messiah is no exception. And Messiah just meant someone that was anointed by God before it took on the biblical big
Mhm.
M Messiah, which came as a reaction to certain historical things that had happened and a climate that was existing, where that was then changed over time. But originally, when that word was used, it was not meant to mean one person.
Mhm.
And so we are all anointed by God in our unique way for our particular role that we are meant to bring into the world. No matter how little or how big, it is critical because we do have it. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist. Why we have been created then if we have no purpose? So this idea that the Messiah can only be this big M
Mhm.
rather than all of us stepping into our little M-ness. And for some of us, it might become a big M, but maybe you're just an M&M, you know, one more delicious circle in a delicious bag of chocolate, no less and no more than any other M&M. And so I think that is exciting to think about. How
Mhm.
can I really step into the anointedness of myself? The
Yes.
uniqueness of me, my special contribution, no matter what that is, no matter how insignificant it might appear to other people.
And yet it seems that it would be so much simpler to default into less than, lack, fear, anxiety. And it's just how to pull yourself out from the disempowerment into the empowerment. And truly, it comes down to a choice. And I think that he illustrates it beautifully with
Uh-huh.
letting go of the system, letting go of the judgments, letting go of the mitote, letting go of that, right? And trusting and having faith.
And you have to be so brave, though, you
You
see,
do.
Crystal. Like,
You
the
do.
thing of it is, you have to be willing to get smashed by the rocks, and you have
Mm-hmm.
to be willing to be a pariah and an outsider.
Mm.
And you don't know, and we don't have a good track record for people that do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's a scary proposition because generally it doesn't end well unless you're one of the few, like, the Bill Gates and these, the Teslas, with these people that are like out there that have taken leaps and it's paid off. And a lot of the millionaires and the famous people in the world, they're also people like that. Everybody tells me you have no talent, you can't do it, whatever. And the
Mm-hmm.
guy's like, I can do it. I'm going to be, and then 20 years later, they were right because the belief was so strong. It's almost like you have to go insane
Mm-hmm.
in a way, insane for this world, insane in reality. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think the world we live in is insane, and the precepts under which we live are pretty insane, and the agreements that we tolerate are nuts. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
you really take a look at it, you're like, why am I doing this? But we never really ask that. I mean, because it's scary to ask that big why. It's just
Yes.
automatic. It's a habit. It's a subconscious program. It's running the show. That's why I told you that book, The Power of Habit. And if you
Mm-hmm.
haven't read that, guys, we may be doing that at some point. So definitely get that book. He talks about, uh, do you follow football? No,
Not
he talks
really.
about a big football coach, Dungy, I believe was his name. He's in the Hall of Fame. I forget even the Buccaneers. I think I don't even know. So he kept trying to. He felt that how people succeeded in life was when they just had these automatic behaviors that were the right answer and the right thing to do at the right time. So he said players shouldn't be thinking. They should be seeing certain cues, and that should set into motion such a speedy reaction that the other team can't keep up with the automaticness of the right choice that they're making. And he said that that's the same for AA. So you have a trigger, right? The trigger, you have a reward, and what we have to change is what happens in the middle of those two things. And so I think that that's what we need to do constantly, is interrupt the story. But first, you have to become aware that there's even a story happening. Because if you don't know that you're in the mitote, if you don't know that you're in the matrix, you can't wake up from what you don't know that you're asleep.
Right. Hence the name of the book.
Exactly.
Illusions. Well, let's move into the other chapters, which is the actual, the story part of it.
Yeah.
So we come to know this reluctant Messiah who quits in this first chapter. And then in the second chapter, we meet I don't know if you'd call him the main character, named Richard, which is also the name of the author, Richard Bach.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole lot of plane stuff happening. And I know Richard was into planes and the mechanics of planes, and I can't relate necessarily,
Yeah.
but it's a story. He's flying somewhere north of Ferris, Illinois, and he lands in a hayfield. Is it a cornfield or a hayfield? But
Yeah.
doesn't he sees a plane down there, right, in the fields?
Yes.
And he recognizes the kind of plane it is. Is it a fleet? I don't know. Again, I don't know planes, but he decides to land down there next to this plane. And when he gets there, he notices that this plane is perfect. Like there's no bugs on the windshield like his plane. Like there's no scratches. It's just a perfect, pristine plane. And there he meets the pilot of that plane, one Donald Shimoda. And they say hello. They talk about a few things, and they ultimately start to give plane rides together because, as you said, Richard back in his day would give plane rides for $3 a ride. And so in this story, that's what Richard in the book and Donald start to do. And they're doing it all day. But at some point, a man and a young girl come, and the young girl is very, very afraid to fly. And so Richard takes the man, who I would imagine is the father, up for a ride and assumes that the girl is just going to wait for the father to return. But when they return, they see that Donald has actually gotten the young girl into the plane and taken her for a ride. And when he comes back, the young girl springs from the plane, and she's so excited because she finally got up in a plane. And she says something like, oh, he said that what did he say? I wrote it down, that she fell and died once, which is why she was scared to get in the plane. But now that she knew that, she didn't have to be afraid anymore. And so she was so excited, and she wanted to become a pilot herself. And so it's this reference to past lives or current lives. Maybe she fell at some point earlier in her own life, but something had happened to her traumatic, which caused her to imprint on heights. But upon flying with him, she released that fear. She was super excited. So this is kind of your first indication. Wow, that's weird. First of all, his plane is pristine. He still doesn't have any bugs in his plane. And this little girl seems to be healed of her deep, deep fear of heights. And this is where this is where Richard starts to get a sense that there's something a little bit different about Donald. What did you think of that chapter? Did you have any thoughts about the past lives? How did you take that?
Yeah, I thought it was curious and interesting, and I liked it. I liked how, again, it was her perception, right? So something was there, and then something changed, and now the fear is gone, right? So, and of course, I love it. It reminded me of like the Twilight Zone. The plane goes up, the plane comes down, no bugs. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So chapter 3, he has a dream, and Richard does, where he kind of sees the entire life of Donald, right? He says throngs and masses and crowds of people are pouring up against him. And so he wakes up in the middle of the night, and Donald Shimoda is in there, like leaning in the darkness. He can't really see him, but he knows that he's there. And he says, "Hi, Richard." And he goes, "Does that tell you what's going on?" So Donald can see the dream that Richard is having. And then Richard's like, "Does what tell me?" And he's like, "Your dream." He's like, "You were curious about me, and now you know, right? Now you know what I'm about." And so he said, remember that news story, Donald Shimoda, the one they were beginning to call the Mechanic Messiah, the American Avatar who disappeared one day in front of 25,000 eyewitnesses. And then Richard's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And then he's like, "At your service." So that's when we are introduced to this idea of him being this kind of reluctant Messiah. And they just go on and on again and again about the fixing planes and tightening bolts and all that, which I think is to show them how mundane it is, right? But at a certain point, he says to him, "I didn't know you could quit being a Messiah." I mean, and then he's like, "Of course you can quit. Quit anything you want if you change your mind about doing it. You can quit breathing if you want to." I thought that was hilarious, and it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes on and says, "So I quit being the Messiah. And if I sound a little defensive, it's maybe because I'm still a little defensive. Better that than keeping the job and hating it. A good Messiah hates nothing and is free to walk any path he wants to walk." And that's true for everybody, of course. We are all the sons of God or children of the is or ideas of the mind or however else you want to say it. And that reminded me so much of the Kabbalion
Mm-hmm.
again, right? And so Richard continues to work on the plane and he's thinking about it. And then he says, "Well, yes, Don, but it seems as if messiahing would be different from other jobs, you know? Jesus going back to hammering nails for a living, maybe it just sounds odd." And then Don, he says to him, "Well, I don't see your point. The strange thing about it that is that he didn't quit when they first started calling him savior. Instead, at that piece of bad news, he tried the logic, okay, I'm the son of God, but so are you. I'm the savior, but so are you. The works that I do, you can do. Anybody in their right mind understands that." And so he's again showing that Jesus was constantly trying to remind everybody of that, but they just couldn't hear it, right? And so he keeps working on the on the plane and then he says, "The more I want to get something done, the less I call it work. Satisfying to know that I was keeping the cylinders from flying off the engines." And I thought that was good because I'm wondering, why did they keep juxtaposing the plane and the bolts and the description of the plane in the middle of this? What role is it playing? And I thought that line was really significant because it's again what he loves. And what you love is what you do. And when you do it, it doesn't feel like work. So it seems tedious for you and me, right? Because we don't love it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, highlighting how what the path that's correct for one person is not correct for somebody else because it's not your joy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your happiness, you know? So those were some of the main ideas. But here we begin to see the foreshadowing that about, that you're going to get found out eventually because there's something special about you. And he says, "Stay in any place too long, more than a day or two, and people knew I was something strange. Brush against my sleeve, you're healed of terminal cancer, and before the week's out, there I'm back in the middle of a crowd again." And so he says that that's why he's now flying, because it allows him to pop in and out just long enough. And then the best part is when he says, he quotes Snoopy and he says, "There's no problem so big that it cannot be run away from." I love it. And the guy says, "You're quoting Snoopy the dog, I believe." He goes, "I'll quote the truth wherever I find it. Thank you." And that again, this idea that truth doesn't have to be in an epitome in a giant leather bound book, but that truths are truths, no matter where you find them, even from Snoopy the dog.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this tiny chapter just full of all these things. What did you think of these?
Oh, I thought it was great. I did ponder mechanics, nuts and bolts, planes. And I juxtaposed that with Jesus, who was a carpenter, like a symbol for structure,
Yes.
building, erecting, and then mechanics, fixing, allowing something to be built, but also to run well. And I'm wondering, like, if that's symbolic. I mean, obviously, Richard Bach enjoyed planes and mechanics, I would imagine, but also it's metaphorical to the role of a Messiah in society to fix what is sick, to fix what is broken, or to build something new, to come and bring a new way.
Hmm.
So I thought that was kind of like
Yes.
I did notice the references to a lot of the nuts and bolts. I'm not inherently fascinated by any of that, but I was
No.
thinking there was a deeper message to get from that.
Yes. At the end of this, the last something that I highlighted here was when he says, he sat in the hay and talked on, looking through me. And then, quote, Donald says, I want to say, for the love of God, if you want freedom and joy so much, can't you see it's not anywhere outside of you? Say you have it and you have it. Act as if it's yours and it is. Richard, what is so damned hard about that? And I love how he put it. But it's what we keep talking about, right? This
Yes,
happiness, this freedom, this joy, it is nowhere outside of ourselves.
right. And what Neville talks about and Napoleon Hill talks about and all of the greats talk about is putting on the garments of that, wearing it, wearing it
Hmm.
as your outer and your inner. Feeling I am already that, or I already am in possession of that, is the key to attracting that. There is
Hmm.
nothing hard about it except for as hard as we make it for ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
So in the next chapter, Richard is curious, like, how do you know all of this? You seem to know a lot. You seem to be a special person. And Don says, well, there is a Messiah's manual, right? A
What didn't you
savior,
know?
a savior's manual, which he pulls out, and it's called the Messiah's Handbook: Reminders for the Advanced Soul. And in this chapter, he talks about how you can reference this manual. It's best to kind of just let it open to wherever it lands to see what wisdom you can glean. And also, he says you don't need that manual specifically. You don't need the Messiah's handbook. You can pick any book and do this. And with the intention of finding your answer, open it and it will work as well, which I think is so true. I grew up
Hmm.
in evangelical Christianity. We had something called Bible bingo, where we just let the Bible open. We just draw our finger down a page and look at the scripture. There is always something there that you can learn or take for yourself. But also, any book will work for that, fiction or nonfiction. I find this to be true. And then he shares some of the parables within this particular handbook. And I took some notes and I didn't select all of them, but I chose some and I wanted to shop them with you. First quote was, this again is a quote or a parable in the Messiah's handbook. First is perspective. Use it or lose it. If you turned to this page, you're forgetting what is going on around you is not reality. Think about that. Like, wake up.
Hmm.
Perspective. Use it or lose it. Which perspective? The perspective of the illusion or the perspective of your divine self existing within an illusion? And if you open to this particular page, you're forgetting that you're in an illusion and you need a wake up call.
Hmm. Yeah.
Another quote was, remember where you came from, where you're going, and why you created the mess you got yourself into in the first place. You're going to die a horrible death. Remember, it's all good training and you'll enjoy it more if you keep the facts in mind. Now, this, of course, isn't a message to all of us. It's a message to the Messiah. The Messiah,
Right.
you're gonna die a horrible death. And so that's news to me, that this is kind of foreshadowing what's
Hmm.
potentially going to be coming up in the book. We don't know. We haven't gotten there yet. But Richard asks him, does that mean you're going to die a horrible death? And Don actually says he doesn't know.
Mm.
He doesn't really know. But ultimately, it's kind of up to him how he wants to arrange things.
Right.
Another quote was, learning is, I loved this as somebody who teaches, and so do you. Learning is finding out what you already know. Doing is demonstrating that you know it. Teaching is reminding others that they know just as well as you. You are all learners, doers, and teachers. What do you think of that?
I love it. I love it. And I believe it. And I believe that when we teach anything to anybody, we're learning it again in a different way because it's an infinite everything. What never ceases to surprise me is there's people that are like specialists on string. I love to see like those shows. What is that show? Oh my gosh, the one about the police department that investigates the NCIS or whatever, like
Like
those shows like that.
CSI,
Yeah,
CSI, and SI.
CSI. I love it. And then they're like, from the rope pattern, we've got that specialist on nautical rope tying, and he told us that only in, such a town in Georgia, they tie these knots like this. And every time I see those things, I realize that there's someone who has gone into the deep end of everything that exists. There is a guy that knows everything about this pen,
Mm-hmm.
how to make it, how much it weighs, the little circle thingamajiggy that goes inside, and whether it's a good one or a bad one. And I think to myself, life is like this, and learning is like this. And I'm sure that guy is constantly learning things about pens because pens are constantly evolving. And so I love when I get to teach anything because it makes me have to understand, what do I understand? And then from what I understand, put myself in the position of someone that hasn't learned that yet. And then how can I synthesize it in a way that they can understand it quicker and better and deeper and faster, which helps me understand it quicker and better and deeper and faster. And so, yes, I love it. And as you're teaching it, you're learning it. And the person
Mm-hmm.
asking you questions is teaching you.
Mm-hmm.
They might be asking you something you've never thought of
Right.
or a way of looking. So yeah.
What did Einstein say? I'm gonna butcher it, but something like, if you can't teach it simply, you have no business teaching it all. Like, if you can't
Exactly.
make it utilizable, accessible to the person, then you shouldn't really be teaching anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the reality that as a teacher, I'm not dispensing information and knowledge from on high, from the seat of my own holiness. I am simply awakening in you something you already know, because there is nothing new under the sun. It has already been set into motion. It is already there. It's about us discovering the truth of it. And so I'm helping to awaken in you something that you already know. That doesn't make me special. That doesn't make me a
Exactly.
guru. That doesn't make me a gifted. And so anytime a teacher, and there are some out there, anytime a teacher is saying, I'm giving you special knowledge that can only come from me, and only I have access to this great voice in the sky. Without me, you can't have access. That is your sign that that's a false teacher. That is a false prophet. And you should not be listening to that, because your teacher is at the same level as you. They simply have awakened before you, but now they're bringing you into the awakening with them.
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. You know who does that? Is the medical medium.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as an aside, sidebar,
Yeah,
medical medium. I don't know if you've read his
I
books
have.
and such, but he does set it up this way, that he is the only one who can hear the message via the channel. And I think his channel is Michael, right? I think Michael
I
is the
think
one
so.
he
Yes.
claims is giving him all of this information about health and bodies and wellness and this and that, but only he has access to it. Like, I read it once and I'm like, it's not that what you're saying doesn't have value. It's not that what you're saying isn't true. But if I can't trust you because you're setting
That's it.
yourself apart as something holier than me, and I'm like, I'm not even going to take the time to
Well, if
consume.
there's that much, and I don't know him, and I don't want to.
I don't know him. I don't know him
anything,
either.
but if we are dealing with a person who's, let's say your ego
Mm-hmm.
is so strong that you believe that out of all the billions of people in the world, only you can receive a message, that already puts into question for me the kind of message that you're giving me. Because no matter how beautiful and pure it may be, it has to go through the filter of that belief system,
Mm-hmm.
which already has a certain vibration.
A little
that
bit
I'm
of a
not.
contamination already.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe he's really good at what he does. I mean, I've never.
I'm sure. And
know.
that just made me very dubious. But I
Yeah.
love this passage about teachers, because
I
I
do too.
subscribe to that way of thinking. Just a
Mhm.
couple of other things in this Messiah's handbook. Quote, your only obligation in any lifetime is to be true to yourself. Being true to anyone else or anything else is not only impossible, but the mark of a fake Messiah.
Agreed. And we talked about that. And that's why I like that way of integrity, the book we're going to be doing next, because that's exactly what it's about. It's how be your authentic self. Be yourself. There's nothing that speaks louder than authenticity. And when you show up like that, everybody responds to it. And I think that's the saddest thing is that we have a world full of copycats.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody's copycatting everybody. Everybody wants to look like somebody else and be somebody else and sound like somebody else. And ultimately, people know you're not the original deal. You're just a sad kind of deformed photocopy of something else that
Mm-hmm.
was meant to operate in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And they lose the power and the light of their own
Mm-hmm.
unique expression, you know? So,
Preach. Each copy is a degraded version
yes,
of the one before. It's a
exactly.
facsimile. It's a degraded version. Only when you are yourself. Only when you are yourself. That's your only obligation, is what Richard
Mhm.
Bach is saying. Also, quote, the simplest questions are the most profound. Where were you born? Where is your home? Where are you going? What are you doing? Think about these once in a while and watch your answers change.
Yeah,
And it's true.
so much. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why you have to check in with yourself. You know, sometimes I do this exercise sometimes with clients and it's finding your why.
Mm-hmm.
And you pick 5 stories that come to your mind that created an emotional response in you. And then I listen to them. I tell them, pick 5. Tell me. It could be good emotions, bad emotions, doesn't matter. What ends up happening is that you find that there's 1 to 3 major themes that are there in those stories. And those stories have a lot to do with that person's ultimate why. Why are they doing what they do? Or why do they want what they want? Any of that. But it's important because it's running the show. Yet that why changes. So people feel like, oh, well, I already did that 10 years ago. Well, you weren't the same person 10 years ago. And the stories you would select today as the 5 most important emotional stories are completely different than the ones you would have picked 5 years ago because
Mm-hmm.
10 years have elapsed. And so I think that that is the thing that we need to kind of create a habit around is really, where am I? Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What is my default set emotion right now? Is it anxiety? Is it happiness? Is it lack of energy? Like where am I hanging out here?
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to do that more and more and it has shocked me where I am. Like on a certain level self-perception you think, "Oh no, I'm here in this place where I'm just constantly having these positive thoughts and creating." But that subconscious
Mm-hmm.
is running the show because it is manifesting also because it's in the subconscious. So it's coming into my life and I'm not even aware of what's hanging out in there.
Mm-hmm.
Terrifying.
So take the time to ask yourself those simple
Yes.
questions.
Just ask yourself.
That's
Yeah.
right. And one more, just one more. Um, Dawn gets the sense that something bad is going to happen. Excuse me. Richard gets the sense that something bad is going to happen to Dawn. And so he opens the book to the following passage. Quote, you are led through your lifetime by the inner learning creature, the playful spiritual being that is your real self. Don't turn away from possible futures before you're certain you don't have anything to learn from them. You're always free to change your mind and choose a different future or a different past. Now,
Wow.
this is kind of deep, my friend.
Yeah.
Don't turn away from possible futures unless you're certain that you can't learn anything from them. Can't we learn from anything? Like don't turn away from any of your possible futures. And you're always free to change your mind and choose a different future. I do believe that, and a different past. And of course, I love me some Neville Goddard. And Neville Goddard talks about the practice of going into the timelines to specific important memories in your life, like you're talking about emotional moments in time that changed who you are or set you up to be the person that you are, going back into those moments in the imaginal chamber, which is a real fourth dimensional space and very creative in terms of manifestation, and then rewriting what happened. And so maybe for you, you were a witness of or a victim of abuse. What if you could go back in a way that you're not triggered and reactive into the space of that and reimagine it and choose a different past for yourself? I have done this work in particular, being very careful, Elenique, before I go traveling in the timeline, to fill myself up sufficiently with light, high frequency, God love. Because if I'm compromised or out of integrity in this way and I go back into a traumatic event, I run the risk of re-traumatizing myself. But if I shore up my structure with love and I go back and I spend some time in the memory rewriting it, what did my father say? I'm going to change what he said to me. I'm going to change my response to that. I'm going to change what I did next after that. And all of the subsequent things that I did because of that, I'm going to reimagine that I did something different in support of the being that I am today. And you would be so surprised how much energy is loosed within yourself. Like I could actually feel my chest expand, like my being expand when I went back and I changed the script of that, creating new opportunities in my now moment. So what he's referring to or kind of pointing to here is something that I believe we can do, which is to travel in time, honey, back and forth and intentionally create what you want for yourself. What do you think about that? Am I crazy?
No. And if you want to look at it, even from the point of view or perspective, not even of entering into timelines for those people that are like, well, that's too woo for me, but which I totally agree that we can do. But just in case, a place where time exists in all its phases is in the subconscious mind, in the present moment. All of the memory of that time and the accompanying belief systems and emotional charge exists. And actually, what you do in hypnotherapy, but even more so in the thing that I explained to you that I was studying, MAP, the manifesting all possibilities, we talk to the superconscious. We go back into the memory, which is like going back in time. We go to that moment that is now linked. This happened and it made me feel this, or it made me believe this. And we loosen that such that memory is still completely intact. What happened, happened, but you don't have that feeling about it anymore. And so you don't have the feeling, you don't have the trigger. So the next time something happens that makes you feel like this thing, you're not going to go from 0 to 100 because that's your defense. Your defense is to just go into it. So even in a very brick and mortar sort of way, like a very physical way, we can engage with the mind, with the subconscious, deactivate those stories, those memories, those belief systems, those patterns, retaining memory, facts that happened, but the learnings can be changed. And what we put in its place is what you said: openness, peacefulness, tranquility. I can think upon this, I can have the knowledge, but I don't have to have the suffering,
The
nor
charge.
the charge. And then we do change our past. Very much like what he said, we just changed the past. And if I change the past, guess what? I'm changing the future. And I'm changing the present.
Yes. The
which
right
is all
now.
you really ever have, right?
Right.
So yeah, very powerful idea.
Well, I'll stop there with that chapter.
Well, I think we can do you think we can do the other? Do you want to do 5 and then we'll do you want me to do 5 and then we'll do 6 through the other ones, or do we leave 5 for next time?
Well,
Do you think
we can
do
leave
it?
5. Yeah,
We can leave 5
I
because
think we can leave 5. We've been on for a
Yeah.
little while, so
yeah.
we'll just
We can do
condense.
5 through the rest of them because they're more story, and I think it'll be
Right. And there's
less
going to be
so.
more parables and stuff that we can
'Cause I
discuss.
didn't think we'd discuss the first part so long. We read the whole thing, but I think it was great.
Had to. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, we'll just cover the rest of the book next week. We'll condense it, distill it down,
Yes.
and then
I
have a
love this
discussion.
book.
I'm so happy that you do. Like, I remember
I
you read
do.
it on a plane and you're like, yeah,
I
I read it.
did.
And I'm like, well, did you like it? Because I recommended it, but only because my
Yeah.
brother did. But when I first started it, I was like, enough about the planes. Okay.
Yeah.
Very, very masculine energy.
It is very masculine for sure.
Yes. But as I was reading it, ooh, it was really, really juicy and
Yeah.
vibrant and
Yeah.
rich. Like every one of the parables or the quotes in the Messiah's handbook can be meditated
Mm,
upon and multiple values derived therefrom. Like if you take one of them into
absolutely.
meditation, there's so much that you can get from it. So this whole book is very, very rich in knowledge and energy.
Incredible.
Yes, yes.
Incredible.
Okay, so we'll do the rest of the book next week when we come back. And then
Mhm.
again, as a reminder, our next book, which will be starting in May, is Inside the Body of God, honey. Inside the Body of God by Karen Curry Parker. I'm excited. I've been wanting to get to this. And then
Yes.
after that, and the timing, we'll announce exactly when we're going to begin it, but will be The Way of Integrity by Martha Beck. We want to encourage you, if you think there's a book that's right up our alley, you've been with us for a while now, you kind of know what we're into. So if you think there's a book that we would really enjoy, write us at miraculousthinking@gmail.com or comment in the Facebook group, comment on YouTube, and we will definitely consider it because we're looking for more books because we're loving this podcast. I don't know about you guys out there, but I'm loving it. This is like the best time of my week to sit down and just
Yes.
rap about these books.
Agreed. Agreed.
Oh,
And I'm gonna I've reached out, I've sent a little email off to Karen to see if she'll agree to maybe come on and talk to
oh
us at the end of that
no. Oh
I
my
know, right?
God.
So I hope her
Yes.
schedule permits. But she's so lovely and I think you would really enjoy just chatting with her. She
Yeah.
just knows so much. So hopefully she will
Oh,
agree.
oh my gosh. If she does, that would be so amazing. But if not, we're still going to get so much out of the
Oh
book for
yes,
sure.
absolutely.
All right, everybody. We will leave you now. And if you haven't gotten this book, go out and get it because whether you're reading on pace with us or not, this is a valuable, beautiful book, and I
Yes.
know you'll be blessed by it. But until next week, everybody, stay warm, stay safe, stay blessed. Bye, guys.